There we go. Because I don't need this up here. Okay, so actually my camera is pointed a little high. Why is it not? There we go. That's about right. Sure, that'll work. I don't plan to use the board all that much today, but if I do, I want it to be pointed. We are now starting the icky part of Leviticus. By icky, I mean, we're getting into bodily things. I know some people, vegans or vegetarians, might have felt a little squeamish with all of the sacrifices and slaughters that we've been doing. But now just about everyone starts squirming in their seats because we're going to start talking about how bodies work and how they don't work. And it's going to be unusual. And in order to heighten that, we are going to look at a teaching from the Middle Ages, which I hope will throw a little bit of light on how people have tried to understand some of these concepts, which, as you will see, are not self-explained by the text itself, and how those explanations are not always what we would call perfect or inviolate. There is no such thing as the infallibility of previous generations. It's becoming a little bit of a thing in certain communities, but tradition itself has never said that it is infallible. And so we're going to look at something that is very fallible. That is very fallible as a way of trying to, how do we still relate to this? How do we still pull truth out of this? So prepare to be uncomfortable. We're going to begin on page 649 with Tazria. And it's chapter 12 if you're in the Chumash on any other version. And of Leviticus, of course. Are you ready and willing?
All right.
Okay.
And able today, yes. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days."
Okay, so first of all, we got to get rid of this word childbirth. Any of our Hebrew scholars here see what word has been translated as being childbirth?
Yeah,
right. But what's the word before that?
Tazria.
Right. So what does Tazria mean?
Oh,
She became pregnant.
well.
Yes, but what is the root?
Zera.
In English for everyone else?
I don't know the English.
Oh, a seed.
Seed. Okay.
Right. When she gives forth seed, right? When she is seeded.
The Fox translate when she produces seed.
Exactly.
And
right.
bears a male.
Exactly right. So what has been done here is they sort of took the word and combined these two words, right? So Yelda, right? She has given birth. She created a Yeled. She created a child, and then we find out boy child, girl child, right? So that's normal. But this other part that's being glossed over, smoothed, given a little bit of a makeup treatment by that is, she produces seeds. Now, in the modern world, in modern Hebrew, right, she conceives is the usual term that you might use in English, right? It's just conception. But that translation into modern vernacular, while it's perfectly fine and acceptable, is going to leave you totally unable to understand the commentary about this. Because to understand this, you have to understand how the ancient world thought babies were made. Hopefully everyone here has had a conversation with their parents about how babies are made and where they come from. But I'm going to tell you the way babies the story of how babies were made that you would have heard 3,000 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, or in many parts of the world, even 500 years ago, right? So when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much, right, they get together. Now, you may have heard some myth about, DNA from one and DNA from two, and they come together and form a complete set of genomes, and that creates a new child. That's not true. Right? According to the ancient science, not the way the Torah says it, but according to the science of how people thought the Torah was talking about, and this is going to be our very important distinction as we go forward, they believed that all of the seed, all of the instructions for what was to be built came from the man. And the woman, she produced it, She produced the fertile ground in which that seed was planted. And then that ground would contribute the building blocks that the seed would unfold. And why did they think this? Because that's how the seeds they worked with worked, right? I mean, if you've ever planted a seed, you take a seed, you put it in the ground, and then you get a tree. I mean, let's be honest, which thing was most important, the seed or the ground? The seed, right? I mean, if I take an apple tree seed and I put it into ground, I'm going to get an apple tree. If I take an orange tree seed, I put it in the ground, I'm going to get an orange tree. If I take the apple tree seed and I put it into the ground taken from around an apple tree or around an orange tree, guess which kind of tree I'm still going to get? An apple tree, right? The seed is dominant. The seed is everything. And the ground, yes, is important. You got to have good ground. You got to have rich ground and fertile ground and lots of the nutrients, we would call it ground. But really the seed is what's going on here. Now, that concept then of how the body worked is what they brought to this text. Now, you'll notice that doesn't work precisely, right? Because what was the word that we used here, this Tazria, what is it saying? Is that she provides a seed,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Which doesn't exactly fit the ancient scientific understanding. I should point out, it does fit our modern understanding, right? Our modern understanding is that there is seed, meaning there is genetic material provided by both mother and father. But the ancient world didn't know that. They didn't.
The Hebrew construction, does that really say that she produces a seed, or is Isha ki Tazria could be seeded?
No, it's not a passive voice. It's in the third person feminine form. So it is she seeds.
She seeds.
She
So
seeds.
she produces the seed. So
Well,
it's
so
like
that's what it sounds like if you were going to try and break this into its most literal possible ancient Hebrew conception. Now, the problem is that how the people who read the Torah understood it? Or did they read it as just being, she got pregnant? Which is more of what the modern Hebrew understanding of Tazria would be, right? She got pregnant. So this is where language gets really tricky. And also it's where you open up doors for interpreting the language according to your understanding. And which is why when we get to our commentator for today, you're going to see that he understands this whole section based on his understanding of the human body in his day and age. And that vulnerability to how we interpret text is something that I want to really highlight. But we need to continue pushing on so we can see the rest of how what the aftermath is of a birth. And I don't mean the sleepless nights and dirty diapers. I mean, what is the aftermath ritually for a birth?
When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days. She shall be impure as at the time of her menstrual infirmity. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised.
We all know that.
She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. If she bears a female, she shall be impure 2 weeks, as during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of blood purification for 66 days.
Okay, so what happens here?
Discrimination.
Okay, so discrimination is the word over here. So there feels like there is something going on. Now, who's being discriminated against here?
Women.
Right. Well, it sounds like the women.
No,
So
no,
Wait a
baby
Okay.
boys.
Baby
Baby boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, the girl didn't get circumcised.
Right.
Right.
Okay. And secondly, what is this 7 days versus 14 days? And then the
33 days versus 66 days.
exactly, which you'll notice, by the way, if you do the math, 7 plus 33, 40, thank you. And 66 plus 14, 80, right? So it's double and double.
Oh, 40 days.
So it looks like it's not double and double because you get the 66 and then 33 and it's like, but it actually works out that you got 40 days versus 80 days total that we're having to deal with this question. So it might, on the one hand, seem that you do 40 days of this ritual, which is still very, very unclear by just this text. We're going to get a little more clarity when we get to our commentator. You get 40 days worth of it for a boy, and you get 80 days worth of it for a girl. On the one hand, that may be yay boys, boo girls. On the other hand, that may be yay girls, boo boys, because maybe, you know, longer ritual might be better than shorter ritual. On the other hand, it may just be boys different, girls different. And it's not pro or con either of them. There's nothing in the text itself which tells us that this is positive or negative or in favor of one or against the other. It's just telling us this is what you do. And then again, as I mentioned before, how we already understand nature, society, humans, gender roles, bodies, all these things, that will influence how we interpret this as a positive, negative, or otherwise handling of this idea. Does that make sense? So it's very easy to jump in and say discrimination, right? Because we are attuned, thankfully so in the modern world, to recognizing when there is inequality, that there is often oppression behind the inequality. But sometimes we're on a hair trigger, right? Sometimes we claim something as discrimination when in fact it's simply differentiation. Right? If I do not make the cut for the NBA tryouts, that is not discrimination. That is differentiation, because I would not be good on any team. Right? It's just not going to happen. I wouldn't even be good, you know, as the water boy. So we have to be careful that our own sensitivities don't jeopardize our understanding of the text any more than the sensitivities of our ancestors in some places may have also jeopardized their understanding of the text. All right, just a little bit more. On the completion.
On the completion of her period of purification for either son or daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a purification offering. He shall offer it before the Lord and make expiation on her behalf. She shall then be pure from her flow of blood. Such are the rituals concerning her who bears a child, male or female. If, however, her means do not suffice for a sheep, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a purification offering. The priest shall make expiation on her behalf, and she shall be pure.
Okay, so again, translation is working things out for us here. What is a purification offering? It's called a chatat, right? What is a chet in translate? A sin, right? This is what normally would get translated as a sin offering, is here being translated as a purification offering. Now, that's not fair either to the word purification or sin, because the word sin we have loaded in our brain as being always something horrible has happened, right? And therefore, if I say this is a sin offering, you're immediately going to think, well, what horrible thing has she done that she has to bring a sin offering? And you're like, oh, is giving birth a sin? Right? Maybe this means that having sex is a sin. Right? And so this is where language gets loaded. So the word chatat is kept as a chatat offering sometimes is better, rather than trying to push it into an English word where we're always going to come up against problems. So I just want you to hold that in mind. But notice again, now, no discrimination. Whenever you finish this completion or complete this period, you bring the same sacrifice, whether it's a boy or whether it's a girl. And there's no discrimination based upon wealth. Everybody can bring whatever it is they're able to afford. So whatever discrimination we might have thought was going on seems to be blunted by this.
How is this the first time that they specifically mentioned in Torah that a woman has to bring it?
As a commandment that she's the one who is participating in the ceremony? Yes.
She's the focus of it.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has been commanded as a group with regards to other sacrifices.
Okay.
This is the first time a woman has been singled out for bringing a sacrifice. So this is saying the women,
stay out of here.
Well, they were never told to stay out of there.
No, I mean,
the women were allowed to participate in the sacrificial rites 99% as much as the men.
Okay.
Right, there was like a one last threshold that they couldn't cross. That's right. When someone talked about like the women's court in the ancient temple,
Right.
it's a total misnomer, because the women's court was everybody's court.
Oh.
And then there was like the last few steps that only the men could go into. And so if you measure the amount of volume of space, it was, you had the temple here and altar and all of that, and you had the wall around it, and then this was the gate. And there was like a little platform here, and then you had the court, right? This was the women's court, right? That's the sign for Venus. And this was the men's court, right? So, and there were men and women here. This was mixed all around, right? And then you would come up here to bring your sacrifice to the temple. And if you were a woman, you wouldn't quite go all the way up. The priest would meet you halfway, so to speak. So that was the only difference that was going on here. There's, by the way, no mechitza, right? No wall of separation between men and women in this space. Is that the question you were wondering?
I was going to say there's no mechitza.
No mechitza, no mechitza. There was only one time of year when there was a mechitza that was later added. It wasn't even originally there, and it was during the water drawing ceremony around Sukkot, and that was only because people were getting a little too frolicky. They were having too much of a good time. And then they felt it was better. And even then, they ended up putting equal partitions so that both would be able to see the ceremony equally and keep their hands to themselves. But that was only for one day out of the entire year.
That was a balcony, though.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Now they built a temporary balcony for just that ceremony. But it was not there as a permanent structure, and it wasn't there during any of the other activities that were happening in the courtyard. Okay. Sefer HaChinuch, one of the great compilations of Jewish law during the Middle Ages that provides both legal instruction in general, not all the details, along with a philosophy of why some of the laws are the way they are. And when we get to this particular question of Tazria, of what happens during the seeding and then afterwards, he provides a very clear summary of the state-of-the-art medicine of the day. And it's wrong.
Oh.
But you're going to see how he takes his medicine and he puts it into the text. And that's what I want you to understand. And I want you to also stay with him, right? And realize that if this is how you believe the world worked, that you would probably agree with his analysis. And then second, I want you to think in your own mind, what are things you look at either in the text or in your own life that are based on some understanding of the world that could be wrong, or at the very least incomplete? Right? So we are all coming with loaded guns whenever we open up a book, and especially when it comes to the Torah. And his gun was loaded with the science of his day, and we're going to see there are some errors, and that is going to also call into question not the legal conclusions, but the philosophical conclusions that he makes. Okay, you ready? We're on the commandment.
The commandment of the matter of the impurity of a woman who has given birth. To render a woman who has given birth impure, meaning to say that when a woman gives birth, she be impure for her husband, and all the more so for pure items, 7 days for a male and 2 weeks for a female, as it's stated in Leviticus.
Okay, so notice what he's first of all clarifying for us is that the state of impurity for her is only 1 week or 2 weeks. It is not 40 days and 80 days. Which I'm pretty sure is how most people probably thought when they first read that text. That's not the way Jewish law interprets this text. Jewish law says, no, you're impure for a week, you're impure for 2 weeks, one or the other, depending upon the gender of the child. And yes, you're impure for your husband, meaning for intimate relations, and you're also impure with regards to other holy items that you shouldn't come into contact with. Okay, so far.
That's actually very considerate of women. When you've given birth, tell the husband, just stay away from her for a while, okay?
For a week?
Right? It's kindness.
No,
It's
it's kind to the
absolute
women.
kindness in a way that I bet other groups of the other peoples didn't have respect for
Well,
women.
is it or isn't it? Because it's not a
No.
question of kindness. If you remember, she can always tell him, leave me alone.
Oh, I don't think in some...
In our faith,
Oh.
right?
Yeah, in our faith,
In
yes.
our faith, it is absolutely forbidden for a man to rape his wife.
But I could see it surrounding. I mean,
Right.
why else did God say to us, don't eat pigs? Because the other people were eating pigs. Don't worship idols. They would worship idols. Don't leave your woman alone for a week or 2 weeks because the other guys weren't.
Well, yes.
Which I think
or,
is absolute kindness to women.
or the other women weren't leaving their husbands alone.
Not the week you gave birth. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so onward.
What
Sorry.
would it be kinder to do 2 weeks if you had birth to a girl?
Okay, so we're
Yeah,
still left.
That's different. But
We're still left with this 1 week, 2 weeks as still being
That's-
different. And is it discrimination? Is this a form of sexism or misogyny? Let's find out.
From the roots of the commandment, there's a preface.
Meaning he's not going to just tell us the law. He wants to tell us some of the things we need to understand before we get to the philosophy behind the law.
There's no doubt that all of the sicknesses of people come either because of an excess in the body or from the angle of a deficit that happens for whatever reason it might be.
Okay, keep reading.
In truth, so long as one's body is in total balance and it is not lacking anything, the body will not become ill. The sin of people brings them to have an excess or a deficit from what people need for their constitution, and then they become sick.
Okay, so
It's the theory of humors.
it is exactly the theory of
Oh.
humors, right? You've got 4 different humors in your body, right? 4 different liquids in your body. And when they are in the proper balance, then you are healthy, right? This is what was known as Galen's medicine. This is the medicine that at this point is like almost 2,000 years old by the Middle Ages. And that was how people thought things worked. Do you know why they did leeching during the Middle Ages or bloodletting?
To put their body back in balance if there's too many.
Because you had too much blood.
Too much hot blood.
Right. You had too much blood in general, and blood happened to be hot, right? And you needed
Cool you
to
down.
get rid of it, because if you didn't get rid of that extra blood, then you would have trouble, right? And this was not only in Europe, I should point out. If you go and look in Chinese medicine these days, Chinese traditional medicine, not like hospital medicine. If you look at like Chinese traditional medicine, they also talk about hot and cold and other types of things. And if you are, running too much of this, then you need to eat these foods. If you're running too much of that, you need to eat these other foods, or do this particular type of exercise, or do these other things to clear your channels and make your balance. This is how we've looked at the human body as a physical construction for most of the time that we have been looking at human bodies. Because after all, when you cut open the human body, what do you find? Liquids, right? We are mostly liquid inside.
That's right.
I mean, yeah, you've got these like meaty bits, but the stuff that's actually moving and changing is liquid. And that's also from our own outside. What happens? Our body lets off liquids at different times. Sometimes, from our eyes, sometimes from our nose, sometimes from our mouth, sometimes from other parts of our body. And oftentimes the solidity or the dampness of different parts of our body is indicative of different illnesses. I mean, think about when you get sick, right? Your nose runs, you're coughing up phlegm, right? In diarrhea or vomiting, that there's all sorts of changes of how these liquids are inside of you. And it's clear that something is out of balance, or else why would I be sick? So with that science in mind, and this was considered science at the time, right? As sure as you are of germs, they were as sure of these things. If that is the science of the time, then you need to understand that to understand what he's about to say, which is our bodies only get sick when we're out of balance. Now, what he says here that I think is remarkably revolutionary is he adds in this notion of sin, but he doesn't say sin magically transforms part of your body. He says, when you commit sins, you will then do something that tilts your body out of balance. So he's not saying because you sinned, you magically get a disease. He's saying because you sinned, you've exposed yourself to an imbalance. You're actually doing something, if you're eating something that's not kosher, or if you're sleeping with a bunch of women or whatever, you've actually done something that has changed your body physically because of your physical transgression. And that physical change, that's what's making you ill. It's not just a straight miraculous punishment of your transgression. It's like, saying when I get drunk, I get a hangover. It's not magical, right? It's because of the alcohol that I get the hangover, but I can still point at the alcohol and say that was the problem. Even if I can track the chemical reaction that leads to the hangover, I can still point back to the alcohol and say I shouldn't have gotten drunk. And that's what he's saying here, is you shouldn't have sinned because it leads you physically to be ill.
So, Cassie, Is it the sitting that leaves you physically ill? Was there another thought that said that the Torah kept the body balanced?
Yes, it's the same. If you keep the Torah, then you will not be doing things that put you out of balance. And that's very much how he's interpreting the one of the practical benefits of keeping Torah in light of his ancient science. Now, in the modern world, we will do much the same. And you'll find podcasts and YouTubers who will go through all sorts of ways that they'll say, see how keeping kosher is good for a healthy lifestyle. It's good for cholesterol, or it's good for your salt intake, or you'll see people who will try to do the same thing in modern science, nutrition science, health science, medical science, psychology. They'll use the modern science and say, see, the Torah told you all of that already. That's what he's doing. He's saying, see, the Torah told us about all these bloods and biles and humors and all of that. And that's why we know what we know. But it's backwards. What he's saying he knows because he's heard about Galen and heard about Greek medicine, not because the Torah told him it was so. Maybe you noticed the Torah nowhere said anything about any of this. Right? That's why he had to add a preface. And that's why he also had to use the wonderful warning phrase, there is no doubt. Because as soon as you hear someone say there is no doubt, you better believe there is no proof. Right? Because if there was proof, he would have brought the proof. Whenever anyone says, it's clear to everyone, right? Or it should go without saying. As soon as anyone says that, it's because they never came up with proof for why they're actually saying what they're saying. Because that's why it goes without saying, because they don't have anything to say. Okay, so with that in mind, his science of the day, which is wrong, by the way, just make sure everyone understands that.
And we have already said in the warning of the torn animal,
which is treifa, the torn animal, which was discussed before.
And in the prohibitions of foods, that God, blessed be he, distanced his people that he chose from all the things that hurt the body, in that it is a vessel for the soul that knows its creator.
Right. So he is arguing now on this premise that keeping kosher and staying away from animals that were torn up by another animal, or that were dying from a mortal wound, that we shouldn't be eating them. He is now stating not only do we do those just because God told us to do or not do, but because that is healthy. Now, this is a huge controversy within classical Jewish commentators. Some commentators, like him and like Ramban in particular, Nachmanides, they argue that what God gave us matched that medical nutritional science, and therefore that was one of the reasons why God gave the commandments. Whereas you have others like Rambam, most famously Maimonides, who says, no, if God had said pork was kosher, we would be eating pork and we'd be avoiding cows, right? It wasn't that God picked pork to be off the menu because it was unhealthy. God picked pork to be off the menu because he had to pick something. And that happened to be what God picked. And we might want to try and figure out why God picked, but whatever conclusion you come to has nothing to do with the ingredients label on the side of a pig. Right? It's not at all to do with the physical nature of the pig. And that debate still goes on to this day of which way God was choosing to pick what we were and weren't eating. But he's using it as obvious that it has to do with the health benefits, as well as, of course, it's a commandment.
And so too, from this root, did he distance us from the woman who was given birth, from the Nida.
Which is a woman during the month, the monthly period.
The Nida and Azava for a few days.
Azava, by the way, is when somebody has a discharge. This Azava is a woman, Azav is a man, that has a discharge from their genitals that is irregular, right? It's not at the normal time that you would expect it to be doing. So, for example, if a woman were to have a discharge when it's not her cycle, when she would not be expecting it, or if a man was to have a discharge, one of the most classic cases would be like from gonorrhea, that would be another case where there's something coming out and it's not supposed to be coming out now. And that's what he's talking about here.
So you distance yourselves from them until they become cleansed from that excess that they have, which is a bad and infectious thing.
So notice how he's interpreting this. If they are leaking, right, again, male or female, then that's because they've got too much. And if they got too much, then that's a source of illness. And therefore we stay away from it because that is possibly contagious or infectious, right? If there's too much for them, I don't want it getting in me, because then I'll have too much and then I'll have the same problem. And so that was his interpretation. Again, not what the Torah says explicitly, but what the Torah could be made to say if this is how you viewed the science of your day and the medicine of your day.
He wouldn't have used the word infectious, however. would
They
he?
didn't have the term. They didn't have.
that.
They didn't have the term infectious the way we mean it.
Right.
But the idea that it can pass from
Pass
person to
along.
person, that they certainly
Right.
understood. They didn't know that it was germs and bacteria or viruses and things like
Well,
that.
they didn't have microscopes.
They did not.
Therefore, they nevertheless said, that's Rashi talking about Leviticus, that a woman never experiences blood unless her head and limbs are heavy upon her.
Okay, so I don't know whether anybody can care to confirm or deny this. The idea is, what he's basically talking about here is what you might call PMS, right? Is the pre-menstrual syndrome, where there is bloating and a heaviness or a lethargy that comes prior to the actual onset of menses, of menstruation. What he's interpreting here is of those symptoms is you can see that the extra blood is building up and needs to be expelled, right? You're getting sick. That's why women are not well, they're not great, right before they have their period. See how that interpretation works?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not looking for a show of hands, but I think the catchphrase is your mileage may vary. And he may be speaking very standardized here, but actual individual women have very different experiences both before, during, and after their monthly cycle. Even if there may be typical in the way that sitcoms try to make things look typical, that doesn't mean that any one person is ever typical. Onward.
There is no doubt that this
Again, and also no proof.
that this excess makes them and anyone who comes close to them at all sick. And all the more so with sexual relations, which is the epitome of physical closeness.
Okay, so why don't you have sex with a woman while she is during Nida?
It'll make you sick.
It'll make you sick. Right? That's what he's arguing. The Torah never says that. The Torah says it will make you ritually impure, and therefore you can't eat from the things that are sacrifices. You shouldn't come into contact with the holy precincts or holy items, and you would definitely be punished for doing so. But nowhere does the Torah say you're going to catch a cold or you're going to be ill in any physical sense of the word. And because of the science of his day, it's just obvious to him that that must have been part of what the Torah was telling us. That, yes, of course, it has all the ritual issues as well, but clearly it's also just good health advice. They've never done a double-blind study, obviously,
No.
to find out that people who sleep with someone else who's in the middle of their monthly cycle are no more or less likely to succumb to illness than those who don't, right? We do not keep this commandment because it's good germ warfare. We keep this commandment because it's a commandment. But in his day and age, it was just so obvious to him because that's how science worked. And these liquids were so prominent in their view of how the health was maintained, not by what was in the liquid, but just the quantity of the liquid, that it seemed obvious to him. Okay, onward.
And if they have sexual relations, the offspring that is born while that excess is overpowering her is destined for bad illnesses.
Right? Why did the kid get sick? Because he was born when they had sex while she was having her period. But there's a little bit of a problem with that.
Yeah.
What's the problem with that?
Can't-
How likely are you to get pregnant if you have sex while she is having her period? Right? It's approaching zero. I mean, I never say never, but it is exceedingly unlikely to get pregnant while she is actually going through the period. Why do we know that now? Because what happens during a woman's period biologically, according to actual modern science?
The egg
is
thrown out.
The egg is being expelled, right? And the inner wall of the uterus is being flushed as it is no longer needed for a potential pregnancy. So there's no target for the sperm to fertilize, and therefore, of course, it's gone. But if you believe that the man has the seed and the woman is just the soil, then whether there is blood or no blood, it depends on, well, how fertile is the soil today, right? And what are the properties of the soil that seed will then absorb when it is implanted. And so that's why they believe that if you impregnated the woman while she was going through her period, that the child would inherit that excessive bloodiness, which would then make them prone to illness because their balance would be off.
So if you saw a sick child, you would blame it on the fact that they
Potentially.
at the wrong time.
Potentially
You
they
have
could.
an excuse, you have a reason.
And doctors and
Yes.
people who practice things
Yes.
that were called medicine of the day would often make those things. They'd say, well, there's a chance that this child was born because of blah, 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 and therefore the imbalance is here. So let me just put a couple leeches on and now he'll be better. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you feel better if you know that there's a reason, because it's very hard to cope with things if you have no idea why it happened.
That is true. Although I'm not sure that leeches is going to make me cope any better
No,
either.
it turns out no.
Or just the other, leeches, by the way, were considered to be a step up, because before that, the way you did bloodletting was you just opened a vein and let it drip out. Yeah.
A lancet.
Yeah, that's what barbers did.
Right.
That's why, the barber pole has the red and white,
Oh.
because they had 2 jobs. They didn't just shave you, they also shaved you.
They're sharp objects.
Yeah.
Can they
Yeah.
kill you?
If you did it wrong, yeah. Or
Yeah.
I don't know, if you did it with a non-sterile implement, and since you had no concept of germs, why would you be sterilizing anything? Right? I mean, doctors used to hold implements in their mouth during surgeries.
Yeah.
Right? That literally they are,
Yeah.
and then people would get sick and die. And we think it's so obvious, but they thought these 4 bodily fluid things was so obvious.
Without a doubt.
Right? Exactly, without a doubt. It goes without saying.
That's right. And from this root that we said from the angle of excess, the Torah commanded that she be impure from the male for 7 days and 2 weeks from the female.
All right, so now we get back to our Torah quote, and he's saying the reason why there is this extra is because of these bodily fluid balance issues.
As there is no doubt that the excesses of the woman that gives birth to a female are greater than the one who gives birth to a male, since conception of a male indicates heat in the female. And it is like may the memory be blessed, said, like they said, the way they said, if a woman conceives, that is literally gives seed, and gives birth to a male, if a woman gives seed first, she gives birth to a male. And it is well known that the excesses of heat are few and action is always quick. It is a logical thing.
Okay, again, logic means I have no proof for this other than it makes sense to me. I don't have a scriptural verse. I don't have a Talmudic verse. I've got my own logic and science of my day, and this is what makes sense to me.
And it's well known.
And it's well known, right? And he's saying that when she gives seed first, which was interpreted to mean when she reached climax first, that was what would create a ripe environment for the implanting of a seed that would be a male, right? That was a belief in the ancient world, which again, by the way, does have the practical side effect that the husband would actually care about his wife's pleasure if he was hoping for a male child, which was typical in the ancient world for economic reasons. But it scientifically doesn't work.
The theory of humors is men are hot, women are cool. So this is part of.
It all plays
This
into
is the logic.
This is the logic, exactly.
It makes sense.
And therefore, if you had a birth of a girl, clearly there was extra bloodiness that needs to be longer dealt with before she comes back into balance and can then resume the rest of her life, and
Because
as well as
cool,
ritual.
It's cool and cool.
Exactly.
So it's
Rather than cool plus hot.
right. So that's less. So it's easier to breathe that.
It's logical.
Wait, right. This makes sense.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. It's just, well, and we chuckle and we laugh, but 200 years from now, people will be laughing at our logic. And they'll be laughing at our science and our medicine. It's like, wait, you treated cancer by flooding the person with chemicals that killed them almost,
Right.
right? And shooting radiation at them? I mean, what are
Poison
you,
them.
barbarians?
Yeah.
Right? It's just, it will sound as crazy to our descendants as leeches do to us. But we need to make sure that when we talk about our science and our medicine, which is miraculous and how much it is able to do, we don't let it make us think we can interpret this logically and without a doubt, because we know so much about science, right? We have to have more humility than some of our ancestors did, who unfortunately did not understand that the science of their day was deeply flawed.
And therefore, 7 days of cleansing suffices with the pregnancy of a male, and the conception of a female indicates coldness in the constitution of the female. And in coldness, excesses abound, and hence she needs 2 weeks for the cleansing of her body. And so did I find the matter after I wrote this to Rambam, may his memory be blessed, And these are Rambam's words. Because the constitution of the female is cold and wet, and the dampness in the womb of the mother is very great and cold, and therefore she gave birth to a female. And hence she requires a big cleansing because of the multitude of dampness and the blood decaying in her, and because of her coldness. And it is well known that the cold sicknesses require a longer time to be cleansed than the hot ones.
Right? Obvious. It's well known.
Right.
Well known.
I mean, this is when you hear someone nowadays say, you have a lot of toxins, you have to detox, and you have to, use this herbal tea because that will balance out, because you went to LA for the week and the smog there we know is bad. And a lot of negative energy and, let me just wave this crystal over you. It's the same concept, right? Except a lot of people nowadays don't say that. They'll make up stuff of you need vitamins, right? Vitamins sound scientific. But there's actually not really been any proof that vitamin C helps with a cold. But we all kind of think it does. Yeah. But it doesn't actually have legs to stand on. Don't get me wrong, I love orange juice, and it certainly makes me feel better when I'm having a cold. But as a palliative care, or as at least as a placebo, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you think taking orange juice is the same as actually taking antibiotics, depending upon which cold you've got, you may be succumbing to the same type of thinking that he was unfortunately under the impression worked. All right, and it's similar.
Oh my goodness! And similar to this is also the matter of the nida and the zava.
Right. Remember, nida is the monthly cycle, and zava is the irregular discharge from a woman, or zav if it was for a man.
As the nida is purified after 7 days, and even if she gushes all of the 7. So long as she stops on the 7th while it is still daytime by the law of Torah.
All right, so let me just make sure that's clear, because that is not what is normally practiced in the modern world. And he's going to talk about that in a second. Right, so according to the Torah, the monthly cycle, when you begin to menstruate, you have to wait 7 days, and then you purify and everything is okay. And that's it. And you can be actually having a flow of blood on all of those days, including the last one. And as long as it stops before the day stops, you are considered to be ritually pure afterward. Nowadays, most women who follow the laws of Taharat Mishpacha, of family purity, do not do it that way. They wait for 7 clean days after the last day of blood flow, which is in fact the law for the Zava, for the irregular discharge, not the monthly discharge, as he's going to explain. Yeah, which ends up for most women being between 12 and 14 days in the way many communities now observe this.
But the Zava requires 7 clean because the flow indicates the excesses of the woman. And that is the continuation of the emptying of blood many days after the days that are customary in most women.
Right. So if the customary is 7, but a Zava has blood flow on non-normal days, then clearly she's got bonus that needs to also be remedied. And so we need to hold off an additional 7 days to make sure she's totally good of getting rid of the abnormal bonus.
And so it is possible for us to say that the sickness of discharging blood in women from month to month was so that their weak minds not become haughty.
I told you there would be things that might make you squirm.
Yeah, that's a good line.
Keep reading.
Or so as to distance their closeness from man a little, so that he not run after them all days. As the thing of this messiness that he knows about them will be a little disgusting in his eyes, and he will not always err in his love of them.
Right. So if God hadn't made women have a monthly cycle, men would just adore women too much and chase after them too much, and women would get too full of themselves, almost literally, right? Because they would never have a chance to discharge. And so instead, God needed to balance things out to make sure that they wouldn't get arrogant, because they were so prone to it due to their weak minds. And that actually is true, right? The dumber you are, the more likely you are to be arrogant. It's officially, they've now named it the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a psychological effect that the less capable you are, the less capable you are of judging how incapable you are, right? Somebody who is the best basketball player at the JCC thinks himself able to take on the NBA. right? Because, I dominate the basketball court at the JCC, and that's just not how it works. So yes, if you are dumb, you are more likely to be arrogant, and that part he is true. The idea that women had weak minds, this was also part of ancient science, right? Classic Greek, Aristotelian, and which was absorbed by both the Muslim as well as Christian world, simply believed physically that women had inferior minds. And even though the Torah never says that, that was absorbed by most of the Jewish communities that lived in this time period as well, which is an unfortunate infection of ideas that have no root in Torah coming to be prominent and at least common within many Jewish communities. And then being used retroactively to explain something which doesn't need explaining, right? We don't have to say God made women have a period so that they would be humble, unless we've already come up with this idea that women needed humbling and because they were of lesser intelligence. So it's putting the interpretive cart before the horse, right? Rather than the Torah pulling the interpretation, we are pulling the interpretation out of the Torah and based on the science of the day. Okay, onward.
From the laws of the commandment, for the laws of the commandment is, for example, that which they, may the memory be blessed, said that all women who give birth are impure, and even if they did not see blood, as it's impossible to have an opening of the womb without blood.
Right, meaning you are impure regardless of whether there was blood flow during birth. How do you open the womb without there being a bleed?
So just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it wasn't there.
Right. However, it is possible. Again, his science was incorrect, right? They consider the womb to be a closed vessel. And when there was a birth, the vessel had to be opened.
Ripped open.
And when it opened, it was going to bleed. Right? That was simply the way they understood wombs to work. And no, wombs are not sealed in that sense. They are sealed, obviously, in many other ways, but they're not like stitched together. And that's why the whole dilation thing works.
Yes.
But they didn't have that concept. Onward.
And it is one, whether the woman gives birth to a live one or a dead one. And even if she miscarried, and that is when its form is completed, she is impure with the impurity of birth.
Right? So 7 or 14, she's impure from that point on.
And any woman that has days of birth for impurity has days of purification from the Torah written. And the day for male and 66 for female. And the matter is like this regarding the law of the Torah, that after she gave birth, the woman counts 7 days from the day she gave birth, and whether she gave birth at the beginning of the night or at midday or even near sunset, she counts that day of birth as 1 day and completes 6 more days upon it.
All right. So you give birth on a Thursday, and you go, Thursday counts as day 1.
Yeah.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Tuesday is going to be day 6. Right? Those are your days of impurity if it was a male.
And whether she experiences blood a few of the days of the 7 or all of the days of the 7, she immerses on the evening of the 7th, which is the 8th night, and she is pure for her husband. Right.
Notice that even if she is still bleeding, once you hit that time limit, because of what Tazria says, she is now pure. Right. So this is where I think his science no longer works. Because the Torah actually says, at least according to the way Jewish law has interpreted it since long before he lived, that once the 7 days are finished, or the 14 days are finished if it was a girl, for the next 33/64 days, 66 days, she and her husband are able to be together, and any blood that is seen is not a concern. Right? It's like a no inspection time period. Now, what he just finished telling us was that there's this disgusting blood and it makes us go, ooh, and we don't want to be around it and all of that. But that doesn't actually match what Torah says, which is why he doesn't talk about it.
Oh,
right? He doesn't try to justify that because that doesn't quite fit his theory of the humors and blood and bile and all of the balances. But that is what the Torah says, so he does have to recount it, which I do give him full credit for actually correctly passing on the tradition.
And even if she is gushing blood on that 8th night, she immerses and is pure for her husband. as the Torah permitted all blood that a woman has given birth. We'll see after the 7 days, within the 33 days for a male, and after 14, within 66 days for a female.
Right? So you get that inspection-free zone, and any blood is
Permitted.
perfectly fine. You and your husband, if you want to have sex 8 days after birth, and even if you're still bleeding, you are allowed to do it if both parties are consenting. That is always an important condition within Jewish law. But there's nothing that prohibits that from the Torah. In fact, normally the Torah would say if you see blood outside of the normal monthly cycle, stand back, right? That's a zava. And if you see it during the monthly cycle or when the monthly cycle would normally happen, stand back. This is telling you you've got at least 33 and perhaps 66 days where you do not need to worry about any of that. Okay, onward.
And blessed is the one that knows all wisdom, as he did everything for a correct and necessary reason. And he, blessed be he, knows that up to a certain time the blood is damaging, and that from then on it is not damaging.
All right, so that's his interpretation. Too much blood is a problem up to a point, and then more blood is okay. Because he's basically by saying, when he says, blessed is the one who knows all wisdom, he's basically saying this is a mystery that only God understands. Because it doesn't match his science, he is still willing to say, God knows why this is right, but it doesn't quite fit my science. But this is what it is, right? Which again, I'm glad that he is humble enough to say that this is what the halacha says, but it would have been nice if he said, you know what, maybe my science is wrong if it doesn't fit with all of the parts of the halacha. If I'm going to try and pretend like the halacha is showing me that my science is right, I probably want to make it all fit rather than just 80%. All right, let's finish off with how things have changed a little bit.
Now, all of Israel has girded itself and has become accustomed to treat the blood of purification like the blood of impurity. And the general principle of the matter is that a woman today does not ever emerge from her impurity until she undergoes 7 full days clean from all blood. And she begins counting them from the evening.
Right, so he basically also gets to back out of all of this by saying, but that is what the Torah said, and no one actually does that anymore. Nowadays, we're much more careful. So yes, the Torah says after 7 days, you're fine no matter what you see, but no one does that.
Right.
For now, everyone stays completely off limits all the way through the whole 40 or 80 days. And we have to count 7 days from the last sighting of blood altogether, right? So even though he recounts precisely what the Torah says, he says their community has adopted a stringency that completely negates what the Torah option that was being offered.
And this is a great principle, and it is practiced until this day in all the places of the proper Israelites.
Right, since there were some, like the Karaites, who did not agree with this particular type of tradition.
And through this, we are saved from several doubts and the laws of the doubts that sometimes arise upon the woman giving birth. For example.
So let me just make sure you understand what he's talking about here. Saying, look, if we just blanket say, stay away for 40 days and 80 days, then, and stay away if you got even, within the last 7 days, then we don't have to ask all these hard questions. Because if you don't say that, if you say it's different for this and for that, then there are going to be some issues that are going to come up that's going to be hard to know the right answer. And it's easier just to say no. It's easier just to say no.
Right. The doubts that sometimes arise upon a woman giving birth. For example,
and just imagine if you were in these delivery rooms.
If she is obligated to sit out for the impurity of a male or the impurity of a female, as she sometimes must sit out for a male and female and for being a menstruant from the doubt, what is the law of one who has a miscarriage of a type of a beast or bird?
That means that
what?
She gave birth to a miscarried puppy.
So severe birth defect.
Well, we would interpret it that way. But they said, look, she had a little bird in her.
She had a bird. Oh.
This looks like a bird.
Oh.
She gave birth to a stillborn bird. But A, they believed that was possible.
Yeah, I did.
And B, they had to then have, how do you handle this? Right? If it's a bird, does it count as a boy or a girl?
Well, yeah, what's the law?
Right.
If their faces are like the faces of people, or if the face is not like the face of people, what is the law of one who had a miscarriage of types of gnats or types of hairs.
Right, it was a bundle of bits and things,
Oh.
rather, yeah, well, sorry, I told you there was ickiness here,
What
right?
is
I
the-
did warn everyone at the beginning.
I never would have expected to see anything like this in Jewish.
I know.
What is the law of one who has a miscarriage of the image of a man who has wings of flesh?
Like a
Likewise-
bat.
Yeah. Likewise, one who has a miscarriage of the image of a man with one eye and one thigh, one who has a miscarriage of a male together with a sandal.
I don't understand.
And that is a creature that is not recognizable, whether it's male or female. The law of a woman that goes out full and comes back empty and errs in her calculation. And the
Meaning
rest
she
of-
looked pregnant and then wasn't pregnant. We don't know what
what
happened.
happened. And the rest of the many details regarding her impurity. You find those all in Tractate Nida.
Which is so much fun to read.
Thank
So,
you for that, brother.
Yes, the vast majority of these are what we would now recognize as being a stillborn of a child with a severe birth defect, right? So if there is wings of flesh, for example, would mean that there was skin that connected between what they thought was the arm and what they thought was the side of the stillborn fetus. And obviously the other parts was only forming on one half, and that's why, of course, it was a stillborn, or why it was a miscarriage, and all sorts of these other things. The sandal, yeah, I don't know what to make of that either.
Yeah.
Or it could just be there was a story that went around that a woman gave birth, and there was also a sandal, and no one wanted to admit it was their sandal, and so it just people ask questions.
Yeah.
Because well, what do you
How to
do?
get there.
Right? The Talmud asked the questions of what happens if you got a kid with two heads? Which one does he put the tefillin on? And they laugh at the question until someone shows up with two heads. So there are stories that are stories, and it's a question. But probably yes. But the upshot of this all was just because it doesn't match our understanding and because it's too difficult to find a reason, we're just going to say no. We're just going to bring it down as saying, stay away until you get 7 clear days. And that was the solution because they had complications that they could not unravel. In general, that has not been, for most of our history, the way that Judaism handles difficult situations, right? We write books when we have difficult situations because it only takes 1 page to write no. It takes 1,000 pages to write maybe. And to explain when the maybe counts and when the maybe says yes and when the maybe says no. And this idea that their external understanding would influence how they interpreted the Torah is perfectly normal. But when it begins to impinge and limit how they apply the Torah, that's where it becomes more harmful or potentially even dangerous. And where we need to also be careful for ourselves, that when we come to read the Torah, we can't come as a blank slate. Right? John Locke was wrong. We all come with our own baggage, and that's also a good thing, which is why more voices at the table is always helpful. But we also have to be humble to recognize that the interpretation we think is obvious and logical and without a doubt may not be grounded on anything other than our own presuppositions.
If a woman, I'm thinking of the Middle Ages,
Mhm.
even more recently, but if a woman gave birth or had a miscarriage and it resembled like an animal or
Mhm.
something, she would be condemned and
I don't remember coming across any records of that in Jewish law.
no,
But- But yes, there were numerous stories in the much wider literature of European law of those kinds of things.
How you must have been a witch for this.
Right.
Right.
So
So this is much more understanding, and I mean, Jewish law is much more,
yeah, I'm not sure that's the bar we want to set, that
No.
Jewish law is more understanding than witch trials. I mean, yes, I'm glad that we're above that, but I don't think we're free and clear. I mean, there are definite elements here of what we would call misogyny, right? And definite elements here
Yeah.
of what we would call chauvinism that were practiced in the modern world. We would rightly protest, and I hope we do protest when someone says women have weak minds, or women. I'm glad women have their period because that keeps them from getting too uppity. I think we absolutely should say that doesn't work anymore, and that may have worked for his generation because of his sense of biology, But we've got no excuse for anyone believing something like that these days. You know, we've established without a doubt that women have the same intellectual capacity as a gender as men, and that women have the same capacity for being both arrogant and humble as men. We've got plenty of examples of both. So it then comes down to lots of other things, and hopefully holding on to at least what the Torah itself has told us, rather than our own overlay of what we thought the Torah was telling us. And by the way, when we correct our overlay, that doesn't mean we're uprooting Torah. It just means we're uprooting our own errors. And that's what we're supposed to do. That's called learning.
One of the teachings I come across in the Psalms commentaries, wisdom comes from the nations, but only Torah comes from.
Very true, and that is a common principle, yes.
The wisdom we take from outside of Torah to understand Torah, if it's conventional wisdom, we must take it
with a grain of salt.
With a grain of salt,
right?
Precisely.
Exactly. I mean,